Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for October 19th through the 25th, 2025. This week has been just a tad bit tense around the world, so let's go ahead and get right to it by covering the global strategic concerns. Here in the United States, the domestic civil unrest continues in the usual places: San Francisco, Portland, Chicago, New York City, all the usual suspects, right? However, this week the conflict has spread to San Francisco as the White House and ICE officials start to bring the fight with regards to the counter-illegal immigration efforts to San Francisco. Earlier this week, the White House stated that there will not be a major surge into San Francisco, which counters previous statements. They're going to try to give San Francisco the chance to turn things around. At least that's what President Trump himself said. So the deployment to San Francisco so far by ICE agents is fairly minimal. It's kind of like the same that it's always been. However, that it hasn't stopped demonstrators and rioters from targeting any ICE or Customs and Border Patrol facility they can find, or the ones that are already there. And that now includes military bases, such as the shooting at the Coast Guard base in Alameda. But the real story this week is probably what's going to take place next week, which is the potential cessation of SNAP and EBT benefits nationwide due to the government shutdown. As of November 1st, if the government shutdown continues then, the federal agencies that manage the program have stated that they're not going to be using emergency funds to continue the program after November 1st. So as things stand right now, if the U.S. government shutdown continues up until October 31st, there will be no welfare in the United States on November 1st. This is a big deal, so we'll talk about this in just a moment, but this is just the general overview of the tensions that remain in the homeland. Down south, the war in the Caribbean continues as before, and it looks like it's getting ready to expand quite significantly, which we'll get to in just a bit. And across the pond, our friends over in Ireland and in the United Kingdom are having a bit of a rough week. A lot of things have come to head with regards to the immigration crisis, and in Ireland specifically, there have been a bit of election woes this week, so we'll get more into that in just a bit. For strategic movement this week, I again have the unfortunate opportunity to say the line, this week has been host to significant naval activity. Yesterday evening, the War Department conducted another strike in the Caribbean. As reported by the Pentagon, this was the first strike to take place at night and resulted in 6 narcotics traffickers killed in action. So the strikes are continuing as before. However, yesterday afternoon, the big news this week is that the USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group has begun to reposition to the Caribbean Sea as part of the War Department's what they're calling the Enhanced U.S. Force Presence mission in the Southcom area of responsibility. So it would seem that the general sentiment going on down south in the Caribbean Sea is as follows.
Hey, what's going on? War! We're going to war!
This sentiment has also been echoed by President Trump himself directly throughout the week when he has stated in at least a couple of interviews now that ground operations in Venezuela are coming soon.
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. They're going to be like dead.
So if you want to take that direct statement from the president as face value, then, there you go. Now, of course, this could be purely a posturing move or some kind of trick to make Maduro think that an invasion is imminent. After all, he gave us this statement this week from Maduro himself, interestingly in English, in which he is practically begging the United States to not start this war.
Not war, not war, not war. Just peace, just peace, just peace, forever, forever, forever. Peace forever. No crazy war. No a la guerra loca. No crazy war, no crazy war. Please, please, please. Yes, peace, peace forever, peace forever. Victory forever, defeats. Victory forever defeats.
So yeah, just a little bit embarrassing, I think, but still, this is what he said. So right now, we're in the same exact spot we were a few months ago. This will they, won't they, are they going to do it, or is this just posturing? Nobody really knows kind of thing. I don't know. Nobody knows. It's cheap to move forces around, but if you want my 2 cents, I think this is probably the real McCoy this time. And here's why. The Pentagon announced a few days ago that roughly 500 service members would be deployed to Trinidad and Tobago for exercises, which puts a significant U.S. force on an island nation roughly a dozen miles off the coast of Venezuela. Very significant show of force exercises and maneuvers were carried out yesterday morning in the coastal areas of Trinidad, which confirms to the world, everyone knows that the exact forces needed to conduct ground operations in Venezuela are already there. They're waiting to go. There are thousands of Marines right now within visual range of Venezuela, and they are ready. Now, of course, timeline-wise, it might be a few weeks before anything pops off, right? Or if anything pops off at all. The Gerald Ford, if we're bringing a big boy into theater, she's actually in the Med right now, or UCOM AOR, wherever she's at last. I haven't pinpointed her exact position, but she's still over there in Europe. So it's going to take her a couple of weeks to head down to the Caribbean. There may or may not be a refit period in there to top things off. I would imagine that would probably be on the menu. So she might pull into Norfolk for a few days before redeploying down to Venezuela. So again, timeline-wise, we're not talking like the next 2 days. It might be the next, 2 weeks at the absolute earliest. Once again, I have to put the giant caveat on all of this. This could just be one giant deception campaign. It's a pretty common one that's been used since the dawn of time by pretty much every nation state with a military. President Trump is definitely a Great White Fleet kind of guy, sail a bunch of really big naval vessels off your adversary's coast and try to get them to reconsider their actions kind of thing. But I don't know. I'm preparing as if this is going to go ahead. Some of the next steps you're going to see probably before a land invasion, you're going to see a significant number of bombings and probably drone strikes first is my guess. You're going to see a lot of airstrikes first within probably a week or two out before the invasion. My guess, and it's not really a guess, it's really just kind of stating the obvious, is that SOCOM has been very, very busy down there. And my guess is they're going to try to take out a bunch of HVIs or high-value individuals, high-value targets, HVIs, HVTs. They're going to do a lot of strikes on key personnel, probably a lot of narco leadership down there before they do anything major. So we're not just talking like the pre-shaping fires, like taking out air defense and bombing the Air Force like 5 minutes before we land on the beaches. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. That will happen, but my guess is we're going to hear about probably within the next couple of weeks a drone strike on the ground in Venezuela. That's just a cheap assessment to make because it's kind of the obvious thing that's going to happen next. That's the next stage of escalation. But this is definitely something to keep an eye on over the next 2 weeks, especially when it comes to what kickback might happen here in the Homeland. So moving back to the United States for the Kinetic Events this week, like I said earlier, the unrest in Portland and Chicago has basically continued as before. San Francisco remains a little bit more tenuous than usual due to the rhetoric that ICE was going to surge into San Francisco, but apparently that's been kind of, the brakes have been pumped on that for now. That may or may not be true, I don't know, but we'll see how it works out. My guess is that there will probably be a lot more fortification of the U.S. military bases and military installations in California. That's quietly been undertaken all around the country, but California is a more high-risk one because a lot of the resistance to ICE in California is straight-up cartel. Like, it's not like, Portland, where it's more Antifa-based, it's more like, far-left militant kind of thing. In California, especially like what we saw in LA, it is straight-up cartel, So that's kind of a thing to keep in mind as we move forward this week. And then also some of the other things that have happened this week are just more domestic stuff like the church fires in North Carolina, which I have a bit of good news on that front. One of the fires, the Calvary's Cross fire, was actually put out by a group of passing Boy Scouts who were on their way to a summer camp. So credit where credit is due. The troop was passing by in a convoy of vehicles on their way to a camp and saw the fire, pulled over, and put it out. So outstanding work from Troop 39 out of Matthews, North Carolina. So good stuff to see. Now, moving down into the regions for this week, let's talk about the elephant in the room. That is the potential EBT or SNAP outage for November 1st. This has been in the news for a while. I know you guys have been browbeat with it, and there's not a whole lot other than the SNAP program might get turned off on November 1st or delayed, so payments might not go out after November 1st, even if it gets turned on and funding is allocated for it. From my wheelhouse, I'm approaching this issue from a more of a national security perspective, because the SNAP program and the EBT services, particularly the digital cards now, ever since SNAP went to more of an EBT, a physical card, like a prepaid card that gets recharged every month, once once it went to more of a digital system like that, instead of, say, a check being mailed, there have always been national security concerns with, well, what if a foreign nation state blocks out our welfare system, right? What if China or Russia were to launch a cyber attack that takes out welfare in the United States, and the chaos that would ensue due to that? So this has been a national security concern for a few years now. Anyway, the general sentiment is that a lot of people are expecting riots and looting at stores when EBT cards suddenly shut off on November 1st. Now, this probably won't happen in every single area. I don't know if we're going to get to like George Floyd levels of burning things down again, but suffice it to say, this is a big deal. I've seen the numbers in the news media that state that 40 million Americans get these benefits. So we're talking a significant percentage of the population is going to be directly affected by this. I'm going to try to desperately avoid the politics of the system itself and the social considerations with it, but from a purely strategic and more of a national defense perspective, this is a big deal, and it's something to be aware of, something to prepare for. If you're looking for more last-minute preparedness things to kind of focus on, this can be a good point of preparing for things like, hurricane season, things like that, just in case things pop off. But again, we'll talk about that more at the end with some of the solutions and things to think about moving forward. So enough about that for now. Let's move down to Florida. I briefly wanted to touch on the hunting stand incident right outside, well, it's really right outside Mar-a-Lago, Trump International Golf Course, and the Palm Beach International Airport. It's kind of right in the center of all of this, right in the heart of Palm Beach. Somebody decided to set up a hunting stand right next to a National Guard base, an Army Reserve Center. So there has been absolutely no further information on this from what I can see. It's all just kind of the same information that was released by the Secret Service and the FBI when they discovered this tree stand. I don't want to get dragged down into this too much because I will freely admit, this could be just a case of the classic Florida man. This could just be a case of poaching or illegal hunting right in the heart of a city. Could be that, or it could be anything else. My first thought was not necessarily that somebody's going to try to set up a sniper position to take another shot at Trump. I know a lot of right-wing pundits are kind of spinning that. My thinking was that this could be a cartel observation spot for the Customs and Border Patrol parking ramp. So it's not necessarily something targeting Trump specifically, so much as it is getting tail numbers and observing aircraft and personnel at that Customs and Border Patrol hangar right there. So that was my thought. It's just speculation. There's really no understanding of what was going on at this place. The FBI is probably not going to tell us, or the Secret Service is probably not going to tell us what was going on there, who put it there, if anybody fessed up to it. I don't know, but either way, it does highlight the importance of this. Oh, and also the Secret Service admitted that it had been there for months, apparently. So yeah, not a good look for them. They could have just left it there and wanted to see who was using it. That would have probably been a smart move from an intelligence collection perspective, but it doesn't look like they did that. I mean, they could have, but it's little details like this that kind of remind us to just keep our heads on a swivel, because the tensions are not over, the violence is not over. We're just getting started with the very interesting times that we live in. Even though it seems like it's been many, many, many years of very uncertain times, we're just getting started here. So something to keep in mind. And speaking of uncertain times, let's move over to Europe, where we can discuss the events that have taken place this week, starting with the Republic of Ireland. I'm not going to rehash all the things I wrote in The Wire. I try to use these weekend briefs to cover things I haven't talked about, and one of the things I did not mention in The Wire this week is the election. So the Republic of Ireland just had a national election yesterday, and there was a massive spoil the vote campaign. Why did this occur? Well, in Ireland, the way the elections are run is rather, well, from an American's perspective, we might call it corrupt. So you can't just run for office in Ireland. You have to actually get permission either from Parliament or from the local councils, the local authorities. And as we can see by this map here, they rarely actually let people run for office. So that's why people are a little bit upset, because there were a lot of people, I think there were well over a dozen people who ran for office, and they were simply not allowed to run, right? They wanted to run, but they weren't allowed to. So Parliament said, no, you're not allowed to run for office. And the local authorities said that you're not allowed to run for office. So this map here, the giant scary red districts here, these are the voting blocks which did not produce a single candidate to run for office. So in short, I know this may be a little bit confusing, but essentially a very small portion of the country was able to decide who actually even gets on the ballot in the first place. Parliament has decided who gets to run, and that has not done super well. So, as a result of that, there was a massive spoil the vote campaign. As you can see, people got rather humorous with their ballots in typical Irish fashion. I would expect nothing less. And a lot of these votes were spoiled. So, As of this morning, I saw that the far, far left candidate won the election, right, with a very, very small number of votes that actually were counted, because it certainly seems like, I haven't double-checked how many votes were invalidated yet. I don't know if that data is available, but it was all over social media yesterday that people were invalidating their votes, so it looks like a very tiny percentage of Ireland actually had a successful vote, and the candidate that was, of course, the far left candidate won, right? This has not done super well for tensions around Ireland, considering the migrant crisis. As you could probably expect, things are pretty tense on that front as well. There have been quite a few instances of migrants causing crimes and either being let out early or not even charged in the first place, so this is very much a tense time in Ireland, as well as the United Kingdom. So let's jump over to the UK. This mostly applies, honestly, to just England, because these issues are, they're affecting the entire continent, to be honest, but this week, let's just focus on England proper. And let's start with the digital ID thing first. So the digital ID rollout has continued, and it's gotten quite a bit worse. So like I mentioned last week, every time they mention the digital ID, they mention something else that it's going to be used for. And the government and a lot of political parties are just literally spreading lies on things that the digital ID will be used for. So the Labour Party, for instance, claimed that the digital ID will replace all other forms of identification, and it'll be a lot more convenient for you, whereas that's obviously very, very much untrue. The digital ID will not replace anything. You're still going to need your passport. You're still going to need your national ID number. You're still going to need all this other stuff, all these other forms of ID, driver's license, all this stuff, right? Plus the digital ID. So that's a bit of fake news, if you will, that's been floating around the UK, and of course it gets caught by community notes on Twitter, which is interesting, but yeah, not super great when it comes to the digital ID thing. Also this week, the UK has been hammered by the national inquiry on the grooming gangs. Just to cut right to the chase, most people think that the grooming gangs national inquiry has basically collapsed because another victim has decided to quit the proceedings, which brings the total, by my count, to 4, maybe 5 by now, though. I know that my audience is like 98% American, so you guys might not get or understand what the deal is with this national inquiry thing, but imagine Jeffrey Epstein times 1,000. Yesterday, Sadiq Khan actually let slip and revealed the true number, 9,000. So there were 9,000 cases. We don't know if these are 9,000 individual cases or 9,000 grooming gangs who were actually systemically abusing people over a period of multiple decades, to include a lot of police officers, to include a lot of authorities. A lot of people have been implicated in this, let's just say that. So they launched a national inquiry on it to try to get to the bottom of it, or rather to placate sentiment, to try to tone down things. Remember, they launched a national inquiry after a lot of riots had already kicked off on this, so they were trying to probably cool tensions a little bit. However, oh boy, it did not go super well. So imagine for a moment as if Jeffrey Epstein's victims were to testify before Congress, and a bunch of congressmen started booing them and calling them liars and saying you were never abused, kind of thing. So that's what's happened in the UK, in Parliament. A lot of the victims themselves have been booed and shouted down by Parliament for being the victim of a very horrific, I can't even describe it, horrific series of systemic abuse cases. So yeah, not super great. Things are not going well, and this has most certainly, it's gotten to the point now in the UK, I think, and my friends across the pond can definitely kind of back me up on this. I think that there's nothing you can say about this scandal that is not a Fed post, right? So the situation is kind of like a duly noted, no comment kind of thing when it comes to this sort of thing. So there's really nothing you can say that isn't going to get you arrested in the UK on this. So that's why I try to focus on it, because, well, one, it's just the right thing to do, I think, when a populace has their free speech basically just made illegal like that, but also because this is very much something that could happen here in the United States. So I feel like it's worth talking about. But anyway, that's the grooming scandal kind of thing. It's collapsing under its own weight at this moment, and probably not going to get to any kind of conclusion on that for a while. Another thing that's happened this week. See, this has all happened this week. The one-in, one-out migration scheme has failed. So Prime Minister Starmer a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now, said, "Hey, look, we're going to stop the boats. We're going to tackle this illegal immigration. And what we're going to do is we're going to deport all the people that have come over on the boats back to France, and France is going to hold them and allow allow them to come back to the UK under legal terms, right? So if they're good to come to the UK, they're going to come here. So it's not really a cessation of migration. It's just a transferring, giving these migrants papers and forcing them to come back the right way to incentivize it. We can all see through this. Every British citizen can see through this, what this is all about. But this was confirmed yesterday when it was revealed that one of the very first dudes they deported from the UK back to France, what did he do? He got right back on a boat and came back illegally. So this is an article from The Guardian that details his story, right? And you can see how just, again, there's nothing you can say that's not a Fed post on this, because this guy claims he was the victim. So this is the UK government's story as to why he came back. Like, he claims he was the victim. He was a human trafficking victim. He was abused. He was mistreated by his traffickers. But they leave out the point that he actually trafficked himself. He paid these people. He paid these people money to take him to the United Kingdom. He wasn't kidnapped. He voluntarily did this. That's kind of the situation in the UK. Once again, just pouring gasoline on the fire this week. And just a whole bucket load of gasoline was heaped on the fire yesterday when it was revealed, begrudgingly so, it was revealed that the guy who started the Epping riots was released. He was actually released. He was supposed to be deported, but due to some paperwork foul-up, allegedly, no one's buying the story, but allegedly due to a paperwork mix-up, he was actually just let free. He walked right out of prison and into the streets of Essex. The Met have taken over the case. The Metropolitan Police have now taken on this case, and they're looking for him allegedly. I don't think anybody thinks they're looking too hard for this guy, but like I said, it would very, very much be in his best interest to turn himself in as fast as humanly possible, because London's a big city, very dangerous city, and so as a result of this foul up, a lot of demonstrations have been underway. They got underway last night, but they're now kind of underway in a lot of cities around the UK, because this weekend is Saturday, right? So people have time to protest, so they're doing so. Unfortunately, a new trend has started to develop throughout the UK, so for those of you who are interested in demonstrating or whatever, I would advise caution. Because these types of videos that I'm showing you right now have become more common. These counter-protesters are showing up in all black clothing, wearing winter parkas in slightly chilly weather, which gives you a clue as to their origin, and they're menacing. Someone like me looks at a video like this and sees hundreds of enemy combatants. So this situation has gotten quite spicy. It is very, very dangerous, so just be advised about that. In a lot of cases, these counter-protesters, they're not counter-protesters, they're waiting for orders. But anyway, in many cases, these guys are allowed to remain on the street when protests are actually blocked from certain areas, so that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, if you don't look at this and immediately have a visceral reaction that might be hard to explain, this is the kind of thing where if you see this in real life, the hair on the back of your neck should be standing up pretty straight. So, and I say that because the scale of this is really, really hard to convey. So I put together a slide, just as kind of a working slide, on all of the migrant issues and high-profile arrests and convictions that have just taken place over the past couple of days. So I stopped once I filled this one slide up, but this is just the past few days. These are all dudes who have either been arrested for murdering someone, or they have been convicted in the past couple of days, because these convictions are happening so often that these were just the guys that were convicted this week. And you can look up all of their names, and you will find that, wait a minute, these guys, why did I not hear about this? You have to actually search in Google or another better search engine for their specific names, and then you'll find the British government report on these guys' arrest and conviction and so on. But so I limited myself to just the past 3 days of crimes and dudes who are being rolled up. So this is not just one guy a year. I wanted to stress that the scale of this is probably not even known to even the British people because of the crackdown on information. So this is how bad the situation is. This is literally just the tiniest tip of the iceberg when it comes to the amount of crimes and murders and very, very brutal crimes that are taking place in the UK routinely every single day. There was one literally 3 days ago, a very brutal murder in Nottingham. So that's the guy who I don't have a photo for yet because he was just arrested this morning. Once again, we don't have mugshots for dudes who get away. Either way, this is something to be mindful of, and I just wanted to kind of highlight the scale of that. So all of that being said, I know that it has been a very heavy week. I know. I get it. I really do. I don't enjoy writing a lot of these doom-scrolling reports myself, personally. I don't like it one bit. However, I do have to kind of talk about these things so that we can get to a bit of a solution. So I'm really sorry that sometimes the wire reports that I do, the weekend briefs that I do, tend to be kind of dark. I'm sorry about that, but it is the truth of the situation. So occasionally I like to recenter, see how everybody's doing, and talk about what we can do about this sort of thing. So for those who just kind of get just wrapped up and get into a situation of hopelessness and just get overwhelmed with this stuff, rest assured, I'm right there with you. I really am. But I think focusing on some short-term goals, some long-term goals, and some things to remember might help us all, right? To recenter, to refocus on what really matters and how we can dig ourselves out of this mess. Because I don't for 1 minute believe that the situation is hopeless, right? So short-term goals. What can we focus on this coming week and next couple of months, I guess? First up, readiness and basic preparedness. This stuff is going to be super important, especially for us coming into the potential snap outage over the next few weeks. Now, I tend to mention preparedness and then immediately pump the brakes because I think that there is this absolute just mania when it comes to preparedness. Sometimes people tend to want to panic buy immediately. They want to go to their favorite brand ambassador and go buy something they don't need. I try to avoid a lot of that stuff, but I do want to point out that, look, basic preparedness helps. If you can afford to go get groceries earlier than you normally do before the potential D-Day, right? Before November 1st, that would probably be a good idea if you can swing it. I know, not a lot of people can do that. Just keep that in mind. This is a period of elevated risk. We want to manage risk appropriately, so just be advised of that. Panicking does absolutely no good. It's not going to help you. You can go stockpile a bunch of stuff if you want to, but I personally think that knee-jerk reactions to national policies and strategic events are not something that can be done in the long term. Trust me, I've been there and done that, right? We spent the past 5-6 years, especially during COVID times, of what's going to be in the news cycle tomorrow that's going to cause things to get pretty crazy. We're in the long haul now, right? So we can't just preps are expended, right? We can't just go out and go absolutely crazy with stuff like this. But that doesn't mean the nationwide policies can't have a short-term impact like that. People go crazy over the slightest thing, so who knows? Now, for more of the long-term stuff, we've got to realize where we're at, right? As bad as things seem, as hopeless and as awful as the situation seems here in the U.S. at least some days, the situation is still not bad enough to where these more challenging discussions can be undertaken, right? There are still some things, there are still some topics that I can't talk about, right? Not in the public eye because of censorship, but also because, look, there's a lot of people who just don't understand where we're at. They don't understand the perspective of the situation, and this is why we get a lot of these historical quotes, such as from Napoleon Bonaparte, right? What did he say? To understand the man, you have to know what was happening in the world when he was 20. I'm not one to harp on generational differences, right? But you have to understand that someone who's 20 years old today has a very, very, very different worldview than those people who are maybe, say, 80 or 90 years old, right? There's a very big difference there. There are good differences and there are bad differences. There are things that we focus on that just lead us nowhere, and then there are some things that are like, if I need the solution to a problem, I'm not going to go to a certain person for that. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are age-based, right? The youth are the future. And right now, if you're a guy or a gal in the United States and you're 20 years old, you probably have a lot of different problems than, say, someone did 100 years ago who was 20 years old. But I say all of that to say we have to be aware of where our solutions are going to come from, right? Far too many people are not going to be on board with some of the hard decisions we're going to have to make, or some of the harder topics we're going to have to even just discuss over the next few years. And right now, a lot of people just don't have the same kind of instinctive view of the world that a lot of the younger crowd have. So, and I say all of that to say we just have to be mindful that there are a lot of differences of opinion in society, and unfortunately there are a lot of people who still look at videos like this, right? And they don't have the proper, what I would call the proper reaction to it. They don't look at this and they don't understand. They don't have an instinctive revulsion, right? They don't have this instinctive danger feel, right? This is, if you look at this in society, I feel danger, right? It's right in the center of your being, right? This is danger. It is 100% an instinctive thing, right? And a lot of people just don't have that basic survival instinct when they see something like this. And those people who do not have that survival instinct anymore are not going to provide any kind of guidance for the future, unfortunately. They're not going to be that helpful. So this is going to be very divisive. It causes a lot of families to divide over differences of opinion. It causes a lot of friend groups to break up. It causes a lot of division. It really does. I wish it wouldn't, but it kind of does. So I'm trying to keep an open mind with everything, but there have been a lot of cases, and I know a lot of you guys are in the same boat, where I have a discussion with somebody and they just don't have that same survival instinct that I think is going to be helpful for reducing risk in the long term. So if you're a young guy or gal in the United States and you're kind of in this similar boat, but you don't know what to do, it feels like the world is just crushing you, right? And there's no real hope for the future. Don't focus on that stuff, right? If you have absolutely no idea where to begin, guess what? You can always focus on improving yourself, right? And I mean that. You can go to the gym, eat right, get closer to God, don't doom scroll all day long. Don't let that brain rot in. Read good books, right? Learn new skills. All of this stuff is free, right? My generation and the younger generation, these Zoomers, right? You guys have the internet, right? Yeah, it caused a lot of your problems in the first place, but guess what? You've got a lot of free access to free information. You can always learn. You can always do better. You can always improve yourself, and you can improve your situation. So, wrapping things up for today, please, if you do anything, don't black pill. Don't lose hope. That's for losers. That's some loser talk right there. The situation is never hopeless, even though it's going to seem like it at the time, right? I get it. I've been there. I have good days. I have bad days myself. But don't black pill, guys. We can't be doing that. That's not a solution. However, I do say that this doesn't mean that you can't mourn the loss of the world you thought you would live in. I get that. It just means that we cannot wallow in that kind of thing either, right? All that is to say, things will get better, but if we want positive change, we have to be ready for it. And most of us aren't ready for it, so let's get ready. There's plenty of stuff to do. Even if it just means go working out once a day, you can do that. Even if you're thrown in the worst gulag in the world, you can still do some push-ups and you can still pray. So if that's all you do today, do that. And I think that's a pretty good way to wrap things up for today. So if you're interested in learning more, here are the sources for all of the stuff I've talked about this week. My research can be found on Obsidian as usual. I'm working on revamping a lot of the research stuff that I do, not necessarily with the Obsidian stuff, but I'm trying to improve my own research libraries a little bit better. Same thing with comms. This week I missed the GhostNet because I was out doing some other stuff, but I'm working on the GhostNet and trying to improve radio comms and things like that, but also some things that help us bridge over to the internet side of things. So I know radio is, I know that I talk about it probably way too much, but it is just one part of the puzzle, and I think people, especially in the radio world, I don't fault them for it, but people in the radio world tend to think, if all they have is a hammer, then every problem's a nail. Radio is not going to solve every problem, but it's going to solve a lot. I think it's going to provide a lot of solution, a lot of capabilities when things get pretty serious, but that's one part of it. But I've been working on a lot of the internet side of things this week, a lot of the other comms platforms I'm working on, so much more to come on that in due time. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys for sticking around. And don't be blackpilling out there this week. I mean it. Do the best you can. Do some push-ups. Go for a walk. Read a book. And most important of all, pray whenever you can. So that's all I have for today. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.